Law in the media, trials in the media, a fraught subject, I think it's fair to say. I was saying to you before, back when I practiced law, there was sort of basic reason, a law, a rule. You didn't talk to the media
right.
if you were in trial. You talked to the judge, you talked to the jury, you didn't talk to the media. That's changed. Why?
Well, I think it's changed for every reason. One really is the media. It's, the fragmentation of the media, the obsequious nature of the media to get a story and get, I used to say, to rush to print. That's not really the standard anymore. But to get on the internet, to get on air as soon as possible. And there's so many different sources. I think that it's almost impossible to avoid, and in fact, I think it's an error really for most corporations or individuals to avoid talking to the media, even if you are facing very serious allegations. And, most of all, we know these cases don't end up going to trial very often, so you can lose in the court of public opinion and have to resolve the case and really never get to trial.
But is it also possible to win in the court of public opinion and lose your judge or lose your jury? Because at what point does the judge say, wait a second, you're trying your case out there, bring it in the courtroom?
You can do that, but there are rules in most jurisdictions that tell you what you can and cannot do, and if you're a good lawyer, you know that you can give a lot of background information to reporters, you can point them to pleadings, to Qs and Ks, and all kinds of things that help them do their job and point out your side. So, you're not allowed to get on, depending on the case, you're not allowed to get on in television in a criminal case normally and say, my client didn't do it and here's the reasons why. But you can get some of those messages out in appropriate ways, especially if you work with the media on an ongoing basis.
One of the things that's changed is what is included in the media. It's so much broader than ever was before. I mean, back in the olden days, we had 3 major television networks. You had the local newspaper, you had the New York Times, Washington Post, maybe the Los Angeles Times. How do you pick which media outlets you really want to be talking to? How do you pick and choose?
It depends on what the issue is. If you're in a specific industry, there's usually, media that covers that industry. And so you want to talk to those folks. They're normally, more sophisticated. They know the industry better. They can understand. But then there's, people who send out information via tweet. And you have to deal with that because then every other media outlet captures that. We have that with our president. As you know, I was representing Justice Kavanaugh. We had that with Michael Avenatti, who launched an allegation on a tweet, and the next thing you know, every daytime television, studio and station is covering it.
So you've litigated some very big, complex, high-profile cases. How has it changed the staffing? Because it used to be, you had lawyers, you had some paralegals, you had some assistants. Do you have to have PR people now? Do you have to have a social media presence? How do you track the tweets? How do you respond to them?
Well, it depends. If it's a corporation, normally they have a sophisticated communications department. They often have outside consultants. Sometimes you might bring in a crisis communications firm to help you because you have to speak to the shareholders. If you're a public company, you can't just stay silent. You have to speak to the media. And so often you have to coordinate with the lawyers. And I think the best lawyers know how to do that. They don't just say to the media people and the business people, you can't talk to the press. That kind of lawyer, that used to be the old way at Williams & Connolly when they were defending cases, but I think even they don't do that anymore. It's impossible for a corporation to stay silent when there's serious allegations against them.
So what's the biggest change? I'll bookend your career, which is unfair because there are a lot of things in your career, but let's start with Timothy McVeigh, the penalty phase. You handled that. Very high profile, clearly a national case, up to, as you mentioned, Justice Kavanaugh. I mean, 2 very high profile cases, very different cases.
Very different.
But very high profile cases. In terms of dealing with the media, what's the biggest change?
Well, I would say even back in the Oklahoma City bombing cases, we did deal with the media. We talked to the media. The media was very different. Time magazine was big there. Half the people here probably don't even know that everybody read Time magazine back then. And there was a reporter that covered the government, and I was in the prosecution team, and there was a reporter that covered the defense. So we would, they tried to develop a relationship with us, and we would talk to them within the confines of the rules, and the defense would do the same thing. Now there's just multiple outlets where you don't just have these major media outlets that have one reporter on each side, but you have, every kind, as you were talking about, of media up and down. And so I think it's determining who will have the most influence and who will be most objective and hear you out. I mean, you can talk to some people until you're blue in the face, as we know, and you're not going to persuade them. And in fact, they have an agenda. And I saw that quite clearly. There's a lot of media bias. Some of it and much of it I don't think is political. I think it's personal, and we all have some of that. But I saw that quite starkly representing Justice Kavanaugh. And there were people, it didn't matter what you said, and because there are no real standards in the media, I think we saw it ourselves. The New Yorker wrote one article saying they had enough sources, and the New York Times said they didn't. You know, I thought the New York Times was right, of course, and that the New Yorker article kind of devolved over time, but it's hard to argue with those folks when they have also done some very good work in that area. So I think you also have to pick the reporters who you think will give you a fair shake. That doesn't mean they're going to say everything is fantastic about your company or your client.
So you just said it, there are no standards, is what you said.
None.
Is that where we are really? I mean, is the president basically right that it's all fake news at this point? And what does that do if you're trying to get your word out? You referred to Time Magazine. Back in those days, people believed, maybe they're right, maybe they were wrong, believed what they read in Time Magazine. They believed what they read in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Are those days just gone?
Well, I hope they're not totally gone. I'm married to a reporter, so I do believe that some journalists can be fair, or they can at least let you know their bias, you know, announce that. But there's so much opinion journalism these days that is masquerading, I think, as objective journalism, and that makes it very difficult. I think people have confused, you know, provocative stories don't equal truth. Sensational stories don't equal truth, but they get you on television or they get you, you know, kind of clicks on the internet. What is really truth is corroboration. We use that term legally, but that's what we all know every day when you decide whether you think someone's telling the truth. It's normally because you hear something else that's consistent or you see something else that's consistent with that. And I think the media has generally, not all of the media, but much of the media doesn't have any standards that they apply. And so the folks at the New Yorker thought they were doing the right thing and would talk to you and talk to me and try to explain why they thought it was right. And then the New York Times said, no, we couldn't get anyone to corroborate the story, so we wouldn't go with it. And so I think that makes it really difficult for people trying to talk to the media because there's no way to hold them accountable.
In a world that's that complicated, and we have this in other places as well, we rely on brands to sort it out because it's just, there are too many alternatives. You can't sort through every one of them individually. Are there brands that go beyond individuals, or do you have to go reporter by reporter? I mean, are there brands like it used to be the New York Times was a brand, Wall Street Journal was a brand, that in general, over time, on average, are more associated with fairness, with standards, or really does it have to be reporter by reporter?
I think there are still brands, you know, starting here with Bloomberg, but on the other side, it depends on the reporter who works for that media outlet. Because sometimes, you know, you're out, let's say, in another jurisdiction, you're not close to New York, and the reporter is a stringer, and they're not as experienced. And often, I don't think they mean to always not give you a fair shake, but they honestly don't understand the information that they're hearing, especially in a complex industry or complex dispute. You know, I represented the NCAA, I do still, and there's a big controversy over whether athletes should be paid, and we just had a bench trial. And a lot of the reporters out there, I think, went with the emotional issues, and there are a lot, and it's a very complicated question, but I'm not sure that some of the reporters understood all of the information and could put it in the context for somebody who's reading a short article to understand. So I think brands are important, but they're only as good as the hiring criteria of that brand.
Look at it from the other way around. You're involved in, as I say, very high-profile cases. You have a lot of different reporters who want to talk to your principals. In general, my experience, most CEOs, not all, but most CEOs just say, I don't want to talk to them. How do you make the decision when to cooperate and when not to cooperate?
You know, it depends on your client. Will your client do well? Is your client really aware of all the details? I mean, often when a corporation is accused of something the CEO doesn't know or hasn't found out enough and would not appear to be an educated source, and that would be an embarrassment to the company and to the CEO. There are some people, as you know, who are just better with the media. They're more experienced. But sometimes it's very effective to put someone out there who is raw. You know, just like in a trial, I like to put on an expert who's never testified because a jury thinks, okay, this person isn't slick. They're not making their living being an expert witness. So sometimes I think, you know, the corporate guy or gal who is just doing their job and is going to answer the questions might be just as effective in disarming, you know, to the public or the reporter as someone who's very sophisticated. That can go really wrong. as well. But it really depends on the client.
You've talked about sort of a relativism that's penetrated media, that there are an awful lot of, part of it's just because there are more of them, part of it maybe is because of the criticism that's been made of the media and the fake news mantra that we hear. Is there any danger of that infiltrating our judicial system? I mean, and I'm mindful right now of the exchange between President Trump and Chief Justice Roberts about supposedly the Obama judge, as he called him, out in California with the immigration issue. Is there a danger of actually that relativism with respect to truth penetrating inside the courtroom?
Well, I think that's what some people are trying to do when they criticize the judiciary. You know, I'm a forever optimist, so I believe in our institutions, and I believe the Chief Justice spoke out because he wanted to not just speak to the president, he wanted to speak to all the judges around the country to say, I endorse your independence, and I'm not going to let people start to take away from your kind of power, because the only power judges really have is because we believe the system is fair and that people go into court and get a fair hearing. It doesn't mean they always win, but they get a fair hearing. And so I think he was trying, I have not spoken to him about this, but my analysis is he was trying to speak to everyone to say we will all still be independent, and this institution is important by that. And when people try to undermine it and question it, we have to stand up. And I think, that was a good thing. I'm not sure. It didn't stop the president from responding, but I think was more important for the rest of the audience.
So I'm now a journalist. I still have my bar card. I still pay my dues, but I'm now a journalist. As a journalist, I want to ask you an unfair question.
Sure.
And it's about Brett Kavanaugh,
yes.
About Justice Kavanaugh. And specifically, as I watched those hearings, particularly his second appearance, and his clear, passionate, understandably passionate view about the media and how unfair it was, does it raise questions if you were arguing in front of the Supreme Court tomorrow, representing a media company? He may not be alone in that sort of view among Supreme Court justices. Does it raise questions about whether you could really get a fair hearing? Because a lot of those people have had experiences which have not been pleasant with us in the media.
No, I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Part of the reason that people, I think, criticized him when he showed all that emotion was, well, you're going to be a justice, you are a judge, you should be restrained, and you should have kind of a judicial temperament. But if you think about it, in our system, we don't allow judges or justices to oversee any of their personal disputes. And there's a reason, because you get emotional, no matter how smart you are, no matter how well you show yourself and can contain yourself and restrain yourself when it's about you. So he had been assaulted, over and over. His children heard it, his wife, he had security, I could go on and on. He was emotional about it. He would never be allowed to hear that dispute about the media. But I think he and the other justices can hear disputes about other people, but they cannot make those decisions when they are involved. So I think it's very different when it's happening to you personally, and that's, that was that particular case, but I don't think that he will not be able to hear a case about the media. He understands the First Amendment, and I know he values it. So, I'm not here to speak about his judicial philosophy, right, but I do believe that that was a unique, unfortunate circumstance.
So finally, you've had really remarkable career already, far from being over. But
I'm ready to retire now.
No, you're not.
I'm so old, I'm ready.
So, but from JAG to Assistant United States Attorney, Eastern District of New York, to partner of Paul Weiss, to phoning your own law firm, remarkable representations, including at Fannie Mae. As you look at the way lawyers deal with the media, can you win or lose a case based on how you handle or mishandle the media? How much difference does it make?
I don't think you can win or lose a case in a courtroom because jurors are screened, hopefully some better than others, to be fair and whether they've seen media. But you can lose it in the court of public opinion. And that normally for most clients, whether they're individuals or corporations, is honestly more important. I mean, we've seen it with Bayer recently that bought Monsanto. Yeah. And Monsanto had lost one case. Those plaintiffs' lawyers went out and talked to journalists, not just here in the US, but in Germany, and brought the stock price down 20%. Do those shareholders really care if we can win the next case? I mean, you have taken away billions of dollars, of market cap.
Raised questions about the wisdom of the deal.
Right. Put that CEO's job, in question, according to some of these reporters. And so, to me, that is a perfect situation where, the cases really matter. But you have really harmed the corporation just through that media analysis and without a kind of very sophisticated analysis of what that verdict means and does not mean.